Welcome to the Happy Mindset, where we use the power of language and storytelling to help you find your voice. Today's episode is episode number 53, and today's episode title is called Incremental Gains. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about incremental gains, how I have used them in my own life to keep going, to do things in my own way, and to start connecting the dots in different ways as well. So I found with the incremental gain approach to life, it really helps as a generalist. So that's my approach to life. I'm a generalist more than a specialist. Being a generalist, a lot of the times I found from my experience, you're sacrificing short-term explosive results for more of a holistic and long-term approach. There are benefits to being a generalist. I wouldn't be doing it if there were no benefits. So some of the benefits to being a generalist include widening your perspective, being able to connect the dots in a different way that's unique to you, by combining the different fields of interest you have. Like if you go out in the world today, chances are you won't meet a lot of generalists. You won't meet a lot of people who spend years studying different topics. You'll be more inclined to meet people who have been specialized in an area, whether that be finance, whether that be computer programming, whether that be languages. But by being a generalist, you can be the person who is at the intersection of these areas, and they often talk about who are they. I've often read about in books that it's at the intersections between fields that's the most fertile area. That's the most fertile area for innovation. But it does require a long-term approach. So I'm not talking about like reading one book in one area and thinking that you're a specialist in that area. I'm talking more about being genuinely curious about a few different areas and spending your time learning about them. So from my experience, I spent a lot of time studying languages. I'm still interested in languages. I see a lot of psychology in languages. That's kind of the interest that I take in it now. Psychology, that led me to psychology, a mixture between my own personal experience of life, the things I had to work through, and my interest in languages led me to taking an interest and a curiosity in psychology. And psychology then that made me open my mind more to computer science. So I eventually went towards computer science, and I'm working as a programmer today because of that interest. So I went from linguistics, psychology, computer science, and for me, psychology is what connects the three of them together. So I have spent quite a lot of time in these fields, and I intend to spend a lot of time in the future moving forward. And what has helped me in the last I suppose it's been 8 years since I moved from languages more towards looking at psychology and computer science. And then with the languages, it probably would have been a good 6, 7, 8 years that I was studying French and I was interested in languages. So what's helped me in those times is to combine these things together in a way that I enjoy it for the sake of doing it. So I had a small chunk of time where I discovered language hacking when I started studying Spanish and Italian. I found from that period, for that 3 months, I really immersed myself in it. I think immersion is a great way to learn something. I think you can actually do it over time. You can start changing your environment more subtly. But at that time, I really immersed myself in it, and I had to focus on really short-term results. And that helped me to an extent because it did accelerate my learning, but I was out of balance. So that wasn't sustainable. So I wasn't looking at incremental gains back then. I kind of taken that approach, but I'd really condensed the timeline. So when I'm talking about incremental gains today, I'm talking about doing it more across a longer timeline, a few years rather than a few months. So I just found that this mindset really will help you as a generalist. The other thing that will help you is to, as I've mentioned before in other podcasts, an experimentation mindset. So when you're really experimenting with stuff and you're willing to make mistakes, take on feedback, that's when you're going to start simplifying learning for yourself. So that's the key thing. So if you're somebody who's interested in being a generalist, or if you're somebody who's a specialist and you're wondering how the hell does somebody become a generalist, one of the key things is actually applying what you learn. That's going to simplify the process for you. That's how you're going to see patterns. That's how you're going to detect what's important from what's not important and learn them as you go. So I used to kind of have a very black and white mind when it came to thinking. So I couldn't see that I would either go on the end of oversimplification and not seeing the detail, or I would get so bogged in the detail I couldn't see the important stuff and simplifying it. So what I've learned over time is that starting off as a beginner in any area, it's best to use 80-20 principle. So basically 80% of the output will come from 20% of the most important things. So get eyes for that, because that's how I approach Spanish and Italian with language hacking. That really changes the game for you. So you start seeing the most important things. The next step after that then is to gradually over time, the details will come, but you don't need to force it. When you take a long-term, again, if you take a long-term approach, you're going to gradually build the detail with your curiosity, with your desire to learn. So there's no need to panic and rush it. I did do that when I was learning Spanish and Italian, because I did feel like a lot of my self-worth was tied to actually becoming a polyglot. But I learned the lesson that as a generalist, it's much better to look for the simplifications that can accelerate your learning, but take a long-term approach where you're learning gradually over time, filling in the details through action, real-world action. You're applying the knowledge and you're seeing what's important, what's not important. You're seeing what works, what doesn't work. So it's not purely theoretical. When you take a theoretical approach to learning, I think it's almost impossible to be a generalist, because if you look at all the books that are out there, it's infinite and it's always being added to. So it's not possible to become a generalist theoretically, a real generalist or an effective generalist. You don't want to be a jack of all trades and master of none. If you take the approach of combining incremental gains, real world feedback, then you can avoid becoming that jack of all trades and a master of none. So that's basically the incremental gains and how it combines with the experimentation mindset and taking action in the real world. I've learned this through a lot of pain, through a lot of joy as well. There was equal amounts of joy and pain, because I did get curious about learning. I do love learning today, so it wasn't all bad. But so I wanted to get across these lessons to you today. So if you're somebody who feels like you're a generalist in a specialist world, these things can help you to start taking action and start becoming a generalist. It's only really in hindsight that I realized that I'm a generalist. I never once thought I want to be a generalist. I want to learn across multiple different areas. Like I think I mentioned at the start of this podcast, languages led me to psychology. Languages and a mixture of my own kind of personal struggles led me to psychology. Psychology led me to computer science, because I was questioning my limitations about myself. I was questioning, because I had this idea that I'm not a computer guy, I'm not a computer science guy, I'm a language guy. But through learning psychology, through overcoming my own kind of problems, I started questioning my limitations. So that's the mindset part of things as well. That's why the podcast is called The Happy Mindset. That's how I got into computer science. So you don't need to actually decide you're going to be a generalist. But if you're that way inclined, if you're curious about the world, if you want to learn different things, if you want to broaden your horizons, if you want to be more aware of the unknown unknowns and start knowing a few of those unknown unknowns, it's actually a hard thing to say. Then this is an approach that can help you. This helped me in hindsight. These are the things that helped me to become a generalist today, and to be doing the podcast, to be writing, to be programming today. So I'm sure that these things will help you if you apply them. So I hope today's episode was helpful. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, have fun and enjoy the process.